G'day everyone, welcome to another video by myself, Andrew DFT. And of course, by the title below, you can tell that this video is about the Fortnite Battle Royale scar and how to make one. Now this tutorial has come about because a lot of you guys demanded it when my video kind of went semi-viral, and so many of you came to the new channel and wanted to see a tutorial on how to build it so you of course can have one yourself. And that all originated from this prop here. Well, I've gone and used EVA foam as my main medium for constructing this tutorial, as that is the easiest and most obtainable material to find internationally, so any one of you can get involved and get started. This one that you saw in the video was made of styrofoam, which is a fantastic material, but it is very hard to obtain in some countries around the world, so I thought making a tutorial which could reach more people was more beneficial and served the purpose a bit more. So this is what you're going to achieve by the end of this tutorial. This is the final product in its raw form. So you can still see the googly eyes, you can still see all the individual EVA foam pieces. Now once you actually go ahead and paint it up, once you do it to your own personal style, you should be left with something a bit more like this. Something you're very more familiar with, and well, it actually looks really cool. Now I've increased the template size a bit to give it the nice kind of cartoony feel that of course Fortnite has, and make it look a bit more bulky. Now the thing I like about this one compared to the styrofoam one is this is a bit more chunky, because the styrofoam was set at 40mm, this one is a thickness of 60mm. So it is a bit thicker, but it gives it a nice bulkier tone. Now this tutorial is going to be split into two parts, that way it's not a progressively long 30-minute video. We will split it into two. If you do want to see the second part because you are getting involved, or you do just like the content here, please subscribe so you will be notified when that comes out. But otherwise, let's jump in to part one. Alright, so you're going to need some craft blades, and a lot of them, maybe about 10 to start with. You're going to need some scissors and some basic stationery, a straight edge and a ruler, a heat gun and hot glue gun, and of course the 1/2 inch EVA foam, about 4 sheets. Now you can go ahead and print off the templates, which of course can be found in the description box below, and cut them out as I've done here, cutting the main bulk of the gun away from the template so we can start off with that being the initial piece. You're going to lay it onto the EVA foam on a diagonal so that way it fits completely within the one sheet, and you're going to go ahead and actually trace around the entire segment of this template so you're left with a nice pen outline. You're going to need 3 sheets of this, so you're going to have to do 2 of one side, then flip the template and then have a third. Now when you're cutting this out, you want to make sure you're cutting directly down on a 90-degree angle, so that way we're going to have the best kind of combining factor when we put these 3 sheets together. If you cut on weird angles, they're not going to meet very well, but you'll still be able to fix it together. Once you've got all 3 sheets cut out, we're going to go ahead and bond them together. Now I'm using hot glue, you can use art cement or whatever you prefer for your bonding agent. Hot glue is just a very easy and obtainable one, so a lot of you beginners, I recommend starting off with this. Just be careful as it does get rather hot. Now you can see that we've glued this together and it is having some irregularities in where the foam has met. That's fine as long as you address where they are like I'm doing here. We can go ahead with a nice sharp craft blade and actually trim off those sections to make them flush like this. Now we're going to move on to starting to add in some of the details so we can start to plan out and line out where we're going to need to build up a lot of this extra pieces. So we can go ahead and cut the template here and put in this line section right there. Flip the template to ensure you're putting it on the other side as well, and then move on to add in all the additional parts as well. Now this is going to be a very slow tutorial in the sense that you're going to be watching what I'm doing in a very before and after step-by-step sense. That way you guys are able to follow along and get the exact things done. Now once we've put in these horizontal lines, we're going to add a depth line halfway through one of those thicknesses. Once we've added in that depth line there, we can go ahead and bevel off the edge using a nice sharp craft blade and leaving us with a nice angled look. This of course rounds the foam to make it look a bit more 3D rather than this very blocky 90-degree angle one we currently have, which is not so pretty, but this gives a nicer look and of course more towards the final design. Now the technique I'm about to do here is called scoring. Scoring is when you're running the blade through the surface of the material, just breaking the skin so to speak. You can see my blade isn't penetrating too far, it's just going enough that when we apply heat to it later, it's going to create a nice little piece of detail. Practice if you need to on a spare piece, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. We can then go ahead and add the other depth line and cut out this piece here, of course beveling it off like we did before on the previous part. Alright, on to more detail. We'll start to line out some more individual segments here on the back. So breaking apart the template and then tracing it in using the negative perimeter line, you should have these two sections here which you can then put in a horizontal line, and then of course the depth line to allow us to bevel off this section as well to of course round it around just like we did on those previous two parts you can see on the left hand side of the screen. Now we'll go ahead and of course do that on the bottom. We'll break apart the template again like you saw there and add in that horizontal line and then add the depth line, which we're going to actually do halfway through. Not 3/4, but we'll go halfway through, and then of course go ahead and bevel it off. Now if your blade is kind of pulling at the foam and it's not cutting straight through, it might be time to change it. You guys are just going to have to keep your eye on that and work as you go. So we're now cutting off this top section here, this horizontal beam, which is going to allow us to really start to segment out where the rail on this gun is going to go. So once you cut that from the template, you can of course then use it as a negative guideline to lay in the new pin to of course lay it out. Now we're going to have to flip it again to put it on the other side, and then we're going to add a depth line halfway through one of the thicknesses of the foam. Of course this is going to be a long piece to bevel, so ensure you have a nice sharp craft blade to cut all the way through that. Once we've then done that, we can move aside and start to break apart the template even further. We'll jump down into the handle section and we'll get this laid in, so that way this whole area can be out of the way so we can push into more of the middle part of this gun. Now what I'm doing here is of course lining in those pieces, and I'm adding in this tiny little segment you can see me do there. Once we've done that, you can go ahead and add the depth line about halfway through the inch of foam, and rather than beveling it, we're actually just going to take it out at a 90-degree angle. So cutting straight down into the foam and then coming back in on a nice straight edge should cut it away to leave us with that nice kind of 90-degree section. From that we can then break apart the template even further to now add in the bevel lines to smooth the handle out to make it a bit more easier to grab, and of course more like the final design we're trying to achieve. We're simply cutting off the perimeter edges there, laying them in, and then going ahead and adding the depth line. Now these depth lines will go at a half of the thickness of the foam. So technically I think it's like a 1/4 inch maybe in maths. And you're gonna go ahead and bevel those off, and of course that should round it out. Now you can see my blade is pulling at the foam a bit too much, which means that it's not sharp enough. As well, it's a bit hard to kind of cut it while you've got a camera right up next to it. But make sure, of course, your blade is always sharp. If you have 10 of them, don't be afraid to continuously switch them out to make sure you're always cutting with the nice sharpest point possible. We're now adding in this, of course, interior piece, and then we're going to go ahead and score it. Remember, that's the technique where the blade is just breaking the skin of the foam, so that way we're not cutting all the way through. It's just going to give us a nice piece of detail when we heat it up at the end. Now onto some more detail. Up in the rail section we have these 3 pieces here. We're going to cut them out of the foam, the paper, so we can use that onto the foam as a negative template. Now with that we're going to use a pen and we're going to lay it in. Now it might come out a bit wonky, so make sure you go back with the straight edge and you actually straighten those lines up. Now you can do this in 2 techniques. If you used art cement, you're not going to be able to follow this one. So what you're going to do now is you're just going to go through and you're going to score those lines for details later. If you used hot glue, what we can do is we can actually cut all the way through to the next layer of foam, so that way these things should just pop right out. It might take you a bit of time and precision, but once the blades run through and it connects all those corners, you should be able to pop this thing right out. You can then add a depth line about 3/4 of the way through that thickness and then actually trim that in half. What we're now going to do is apply some glue into this segment and then re-glue that section back in, but because we cut it at a 3/4 depth, we now should have this kind of like terraced effect, which gives us a nice 3D look for detail, similar to actually what the actual design has. So that works out well. From there, we'll go ahead and we'll start to add in some actual 3D depth and layers. So what we're going to do is grab this template and create 2 new pieces, remembering to flip it to have the left and the right. We'll then go ahead and break apart this template a bit further and lay in those top perimeter lines, and then add a depth line about 3/4 of the way through the foam thickness. And then of course we'll take our nice sharp craft blade and bevel this off, giving it the nice 3D rounded edge. Once we've done this on both the top and the bottom, you should have a nice clean looking piece like that, and we can go ahead and just glue it straight in. Of course we applied those edge lines earlier, so we know exactly where it should sit, so there shouldn't be any confusion in this. Once that's in there and looking nice and snug, we can move on to, of course, applying more detail and building up that 3D layer. So we'll now jump into the area where the magazine's going to go, and we're going to add in this tiny piece here. Simply breaking apart the template, chucking it onto the foam, flipping it so you have the left and the right, and then we're going to actually add a 3/4 depth line towards the top part of this piece, and we're going to trim it off to get rid of the horrible textured piece underneath, so that way when we glue it on, it should sit there nice and flush. Now onto the big main section. We'll go ahead and cut it free from the template and transfer it onto foam so we have two sections, remembering to flip the template to have a left and a right. Now we'll go ahead and cut off the kind of beveled edges, and we'll transfer these horizontal perimeter lines in on both the top and the bottom, and then add in the depth line halfway through the foam, and then of course, 3/4 of the way through the foam, and then go ahead and bevel it off. Now to finish off part 1, we'll quickly apply the remaining detail into this main segment. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and cut out this part of the template and transfer it onto the foam. We're going to do it both on the left and the right, and you're going to cut that piece completely out, and then apply a depth line about 3/4 of the way through the thickness, and then of course trim it off and put it back into the section like we did before. Now before we actually go ahead and glue this on, we're going to apply the template onto the design and lay out where this piece is supposed to sit, so that way when we do glue it, we only are placing it down once rather than removing it and putting it back because we didn't align it properly. But it should sit in there nicely, and it's really starting to come together. This is looking exactly like what we're trying to achieve, but there is a few more pieces we're going to do. We're going to cut out this part of the template, of course, onto a foam. It should be the same, so left and right. Add a depth line halfway through. We don't want this to be too thick, but halfway through should be just great. Applying the template onto the foam, drawing out where it should sit, and of course going ahead and gluing it into position, thus getting us one step closer towards the final design. So that's it, part 1 done and dusted. We're making exceptional progress on this, and of course we now have part 2 to jump into. We're going to go ahead and add in a few more details and really get this thing looking like it should. Of course, once we've got it fully built, all you need to do is go ahead and seal it and paint it the way you want. There's an amazing array of painting tutorials, but I will give you just a simple process on what I do, so that way it gives you a decent understanding of what you need to do. But a lot of you did artwork in high school, and of course all the previous schools before that, dating back to preschool, so of course you guys have a basic understanding of paints. We'll just push it a bit further. Otherwise, enjoy the video. If you enjoyed the video, I missed an if there, please like and subscribe. It helps to build the community and lets me know that you guys want more tutorials like this, so we can have some cool props for you guys and I don't just have to hoard them here in my room. And otherwise, I will see you in part 2. Thank you very much, and catch you later.